Thank you, DJ. Let's have a show of hands. Let's see who all rode their bicycles here tonight. Come on. All right, we got a couple of them here. Well, next time maybe you guys can ride your bike. I didn't ride here myself because I'm from Traverse City. My book has 40 different routes and 1,400 miles of cycling in northern Michigan, from about Manistee up to the Mackinaw Bridge, and then down to Alpena and back across the state. Now, I only put the best routes, but to me, they only have to be the safest routes too, because there's, as you know, there's a lot of drivers texting on the roads these days. There's a lot of angry drivers out there. There's a lot of distracted drivers, so I only put in the safest routes. Before I get started, though, I'm going to tell you about a couple of other books I've got. And my latest is Windigo Moon, that just came out this month. And Blue Magazine came out today. It's got an excerpt of my book, Windigo Moon, in it. They're very nice and did a 2-page spread. It's got some excerpts in it. It's set among the Ojibwe, or also known as the Chippewa Indians, 400 years ago, during the troubled times of the 1500s, which historians called the Lost Century. And it was the Lost Century because the Indians were hit by the plagues of European explorers, and millions of them died. Well, my story is about a young woman, a Shaggy, Blue Heron, who's abducted by the Sioux. Her village is destroyed, and she's rescued by a young man, Misko, whose own village is destroyed by disease. And together, at a very youthful age, they have to lead the survivors of their clan forward through these troubled times of the 1500s, and it's all about life among the Ojibwe for 31 years. And it's getting really great word of mouth. I do have it here tonight, so if you're interested in checking that out, or check out Blue Magazine for the excerpt. Well, that's my commercial interruption. These are some of the troubles that afflicted the Indians too. The siege of Tuscaloosa in Alabama. I've got some of the myths and spirits of the Ojibwe in there, such as the underwater dragon Mishipeju. Some of my other books are about global backpacking. This was my first book. It was about, I biked across England, Ireland, and Europe, and then ditched my bike in Prague and backpacked on through Egypt and India and on around the world. 5 years ago, my wife and I took off for 7 months around the world. That's her rowboating down the Ganges. And I've spoken on these books at the library here before, too. You might have seen me here before. But that's sort of a love story and a travelogue, kind of written more with women in mind, frankly. As a writer, you sort of hunt for your audiences, and that's the readership for that. But today, I hope everyone's got their bicycle helmets on, because we're going for one wild ride across the country to begin with. From Seattle to Traverse City. This was something I did last summer, 2,711 miles. And a foolish thing to do, as I found out, because unlike my book, which stresses the safest routes, the routes across country are something I would never put in my book, so we'll get into that, though. The little background on me, I started bike touring in 1987. I did 3 weeks around British Columbia and Vancouver Island because I was newly divorced and broke, and I wanted to have an adventure. Well, I got hooked on bicycle touring, because what better way to see the country and on a budget. And the beauty of bike touring is that you become one with with nature, one with the area. You when you're riding through Ireland, you smell the sheep dip. You get rained on. You get blasted by the sun. I mean, you're right in there. You're part of it. That is up the coast of Ireland. 10 years ago, basis of my book, Planet Backpacker, that's on the Dingle Peninsula. crossing the moors in England. You're up there where the Romans built their wall, and where wonderful books like Hound of the Baskervilles and Tuss of D'Urbervilles were written. Biking down the Danube from Passau, Germany to Vienna. Biking through the wine country of Austria. This route down the Danube is all downhill, and thousands and thousands of people ride it, and then you can stay at little inns along the way. I just camped on a pup tent along the river, and that was me on a rainy day, looking a little funny. You can see I've got my guitar strapped to the back of the bike in a garbage bag, because I can't go around the world without taking a guitar along. So, yeah, not too cool. Well, the reason while I was doing this bike touring, I was also seriously suffering from a terrible addiction to the triathlon. And that clock says 12 hours, 38 minutes. So this was an Ironman on Cape Cod 30 years ago. And as a result of riding, 150 miles a week during the summer all over northern Michigan, I pioneered all these routes that eventually went into my book. So that's how it all got started. And I had a little time on my hands after selling a business that I owned, and so I thought, well, why not get into the book writing business, because it pays like about 5 cents an hour, and you only work 50 hours a week. It's a pretty good business. Well, unfortunately, another addiction I have is to traveling, and I made the mistake of joining the Adventure Cycling Association, based out of Missoula, Montana, and this network, it pioneered the Trans-America Trail in 1976, and they had 4,000 people ride across the country for the bicentennial. They call it the Bike Centennial, and it's got all these dozens of routes across the country. And I always thought, I'm never going to ride across America because it's just going to be too dangerous. It'd be crazy to do something like that. But as soon as I saw this map, I thought, oh my God, I got to go do it. So I rode the Northern Tier route there in yellow, and part of that was the Lewis and Clark route that follows the path of the explorers across the Great Plains. Has anyone here ever boxed up a bicycle and put it on an airplane? Pardon my French, but what a pain in the ass this is. You gotta take every single bit of that bicycle apart. You gotta pull the axle out of the front wheel. You gotta pull the pedals off. You gotta yank the handlebars. I mean, every cotton picking thing has to go in a little box like 4 feet long and put on this plane. and it's tough enough to take it apart, but then you gotta put it back together. And this was at the airport in Seattle. They very kindly had these this bicycle station where you could put your bike together. And I'm no bike mechanic, so this was not fun. And this is how my bike looked when it was fully assembled. It's 520 Trek touring bike, and this bike, I just weighed it last month for a bike tour. It weighed 38 pounds without the gear on it. Most of you bikies are out riding around an 18-pound carbon fiber bike. Well, try riding a 38-pound bike and then strapping 35 or 40 pounds of gear on it. You can only go about 11 miles an hour on this bike. And I found that to be kind of common for bike tourers in general. 11 miles an hour seems to be about the norm. Whereas if you're out biking on a road bike, you might go anywhere from 15 to 22 miles an hour, depending on your fitness level. So, to go east, first you got to head west towards Japan, because you got to cross the Puget Sound and go up the Olympic Peninsula, and then take a right. So There I am going across the Sound on the ferry out there. This is a wonderful biking area up on in the Canadian islands, by the way, Orca Island, Vancouver Island, if you ever get out that way. And there I am looking very confident on mile 1. Soon to change. There's some beautiful scenery up there, Port Townsend, you know, beautiful vistas of the ocean and the mountains. But as I soon found out, there's about an 18-inch wide bike lane and tens of thousands of cars going by at 65, 75 miles an hour. So I quickly found that I was terrified out of my mind. 80% of the time I was thinking, oh my God, I'm going to get killed at any minute. You know, and the rest of the time I was thinking about my wife for maybe 5% of the time, thinking about the scenery 5% of the time. But mostly I was very worried about getting hit by a car because just tens of thousands, and you can see that little lane there, that went on for a long way. You had to watch out for lumber trucks too. Now these guys, you could hear them coming, and they actually were pretty courteous. The guys who were not very courteous are the guys driving the big road whales, you know, the big old RVs, because they will not give an inch. And I nearly got struck by those a couple times. So I soon found out that you can ride on the freeway in Washington State and in North Dakota, and it's way safer because you got a 10-foot wide shoulder. So as soon as I could, I took to the freeway and rode, maybe 100 miles through the state, and then halfway across North Dakota on the freeway. And the funny thing about North Dakota, I'm listening to my radio while I'm riding, and they had a farm station on AM, and they're talking about this crazy guy out riding on the freeway. Yeah, he's dressed in some yellow shirt. I thought, damn, I'm a celebrity in North Dakota. Well, I'm a safety squirrel. You know, that's why I wrote the book about bicycle safety. And so a lot of that is being seen. So I put my rain bags on, yeah, nice and yellow. I got my little flaggy thing on the side. I got my triangle thing. I'm going up the Cascade Mountains. And always wear fluorescent clothing. That's very important when you're bicycling. Let's see. This was my lodgings. You gotta go as light as you possibly can. So this was a little, you know, $65 tent that I bought at Menards or something, and turned out to be pretty good. It was pretty cool, you know. What more do you really need, you know? What's for dinner? Yum, yum, yum. Here's a little recipe I'm going to impart to you. Don't go buying those fancy freeze-dried things for $6 or $8. Just buy yourself some noodles or some, you know, 5-minute rice and throw a tin of chicken in there, and you got, can't beat that. And that's my jet boil. I'd make my coffee in that every day. Well, it turns out, first I had to go over Rocky Mountains. And, you know, from a guy from the Midwest, you think, oh, Rocky Mountains, you just go over these mountains and you're through it. Well, I found out they're like 600 to 800 miles across. And they're not one just big old bunch of mountains, they're a whole bunch of mountain chains. And you'd no sooner go over one chain than you'd have to go over another chain. So let me see. This is not like my usual equipment. So here we are going up the Cascades. $11 miles an hour. Oh, probably 5 miles an hour I'm going uphill. And, you know, the guys in town, they're riding their road bikes, and they'd ride up there and 25 miles up, and then they'd shoot back down. But, you know, it took me 2 days to go up this mountain. Let me see if I can get... Oops. I don't know how I get rid of that stuff. Going up the mountain, and to me, the tough part of going over the mountains was not going up the mountain, it was going down the mountain. Because I got, you know, an 80-pound vehicle on flimsy little tires, and I'm going down this mountain on maybe that little shoulder there with traffic going by me at 70 miles an hour. And so I'm squeezing the brakes for 7 miles down these mountains, trying to keep it at 25 miles an hour because I don't want to hit, you know, a rock or a little ditch or, you know, a squirrel run out at you or something. So to me, it was always really scary going down these mountains. And I kept thinking, oh my God, I'm going to burn my brakes out because, I mean, I'm telling you, I had the iron claw of death on those brake handles all the way down. Well, one thing about going through the Rocky Mountains, though, is that they tend to go through valleys. It's not like you're just going up and down mountains. You go through these valleys all the way through the Rockies, and that's how the Indians made their pathways through these areas. And purposely did not look at any of the scenery ahead in guidebooks or anything because I wanted to be surprised. And, you know, coming across the Columbia River unexpectedly, that's the kind of surprise you want. That's, I think, Theodore Roosevelt Park in North Dakota. Well, again, though, there were some scary roads out there. This Highway 200 through Montana was just like a narrow country road, no shoulder, kind of a big old 10-foot ditch on the side, and a 70-mile-an-hour speed limit. And there were crosses all along this road, so I called it the Highway of Death. And I like to say that I probably got off the road 2,000 times on this bike ride because I had a little bit wide tires and I'd hear a car coming and I'm getting off the road. So I'm here today to tell you I did make it. This little guy didn't, though. Look out, a rattlesnake! He didn't make it either. Whoa, what's having that? Oh, that was my rainy day shot. Let me see if I can get that back. This is a classic. Well, you run into the elements out there.
Waiting out the rain on the Pack River in Idaho might be a good time for a cookie break.
It is raining a lot harder than that. That doesn't really capture it. I use the wobble cam approach, by the way. I'm very into cinema verite, where it's like with an iPhone that I just wave around. So, well, besides the rain and the cold, you'd have to deal with the heat. This particular day, it was somewhere between 95 and 100, and there was a strong wind blowing in my face. So I was maybe going 5 miles an hour across the Great Plains. And it could be, you just be dying for some shade, and there's no shade out there anywhere. You'd see something way up in the distance and think, oh, shade, thank God, I take a break. Well, no, it's just an illusion. I got to the top of the Continental Divide, and I thought, oh, thank God, now I'm just going to be all going downhill. And found out, and here I'd ridden all day up there, had no water left, and I'm thinking, and I'm totally dehydrated. I'm thinking, oh, good, it's all downhill now. I'll ride downhill for 25 miles. Well, no, wrong, oh. I found out, you know, you're on top of the Continental Divide, you're going through all these foothills. So I still had about 35 miles to go with no water. I'm completely dehydrated. It's 90 degrees out. And I really kind of got a little scared. And so that was 55 miles between those two spots without any water, riding up and down those mountains. So I advise you, obviously, to take some extra water if you do that. Well, the Great Plains are about 600 miles across, and then they range from Canada all the way down to Mexico. And really beautiful scenery. It's kind of a lot of people think the wind in the Great Plains blows from west to east. That's not true in the summertime. In the summertime, the winds swirl around. They can blow from any direction, and you soon are disillusioned if you're riding your bike across the Great Plains from west to east. But there's beautiful vistas out there. And I found that once I reached the plains, I didn't have so much trouble with traffic either, so I could quit worrying so much because the truck drivers and all were more considerate. There wasn't much traffic, and really started to enjoy the trip. And just very surreal. Come on, boy. Well, you see trains every day when you're out west. Hauling coal, hauling gas. And I want to tell you, you just haven't lived until you can't bedded down for the night, unaware that there's a railroad track nearby. You know, say you bed down, you know, you're camping somewhere 50 feet away from a railroad track, you don't even know it. You're in the awake and you start shaking up and down, hear this rumbling, and it sends a thrill of terror through you like you would not believe. Well, one thing you find out about the Great Plains, it's an utter wreck out there. This was once one of the most important routes on the trail. West, there was a big army fort here, and it was everyone who went up to Washington or Oregon had to pass through here. Now these towns are pretty much ruins, and you know, you have your opioid crisis out there, Donald Trump signs everywhere, abandoned silos. In the 1800s, there was a huge marketing campaign to get people from Russia and East Europe to move to the Great Plains. People promised all this fertile land. The railroads wanted people to come out so they'd have business. Well, all these people came out to the Great Plains, and for a while they thrived. But then with you know, big agriculture, farming, and all that, you'd see combines the size of two-story houses out there now, and so the small farmers kind of all but gone, and in their wake are many ghost towns. Well, you'd also feel the presence of the Indians out there. This is Mandan Village, south of Bismarck, and at one time these villages held thousands of Mandan Indians who traded all over the continent. And when you're riding a bike across the Great Plains, you really get the feel for the Sioux, the Kiowa, and the Cheyenne who migrated across these plains on foot. You know, the men might be riding horses, but their women might be dragging the gear along with travois attached to dogs or whatever. So you really kind of get the spirit of the Native Americans out there. And you do meet people riding. There's, you know, every couple of days I'd meet some other person out bicycling. This is a young lady, 25 years old. She's currently giving tours with Adventure Cycling Association all over the country. This was Patty. She lives just south of Alpena, and she was a champion endurance cyclist. She's done the race across America. Now she's in her 60s, and she rode this recumbent bike all the way from Lake Huron out to Missoula, Montana, and then back for, you know, just to see her buddies at a bike convention out there. These were three Frenchmen who they were from the Loire Valley in France, and they were biking from New York to Vancouver, and they hardly knew any English at all. And they looked rather dispirited, but they cheered up here for this, and we're happy to be almost there. These are a couple buddies. That's a young lady I mentioned, and then a young Korean man. He had never done any bicycling. He just on a whim decided, I'm going to buy a bike and ride across the country before I got to go work for my dad's business. And he did, you know. I mean, he didn't do any training. I biked 1,100 miles to train for this. He didn't. He just got on his bike and started riding. And he did really good. And we rode together for about 5 days. These two guys were mountain biking the length of the Rocky Mountains. They were biking from Canada all the way to Mexico along the Continental Divide Trail. So that's one I highly recommend for any of you to do, but probably not me. Well, finally I got across those plains. I got into Minnesota and Wisconsin and started finding these different trails. They're kind of like ski trails, bike trails, kind of really off the map, kind of fun. This is the Mountain to Bay Trail. Goes, I think I was on this for about 83 miles. And I saw a great big giant bear on this trail. That's him, that little black dot in the distance. Well, I was riding my bike along this trail, and it was getting dark. And all of a sudden, this great big thing jumped out of the woods 100 feet in front of me. And I said, that can't be a bear because it's too big to be a bear. And I thought it was maybe a horse. And he looked at me, and I looked at him. I thought, yeah, that's a bear. And he turned tail and started running. And, of course, I wanted to get his picture, so I started chasing him on my bike. But there was no way you could catch that bear. He had to be going at least 20 miles an hour, and they can run 30 miles an hour. And then he crashed off into the side into a cornfield. And that's when I slowed down, got a little nervous, because I thought, you know, it's one thing to chase a bear when he's running away. It's another thing to go by him. So I turned up my radio, and Justin Bieber was on there singing. And I started ringing my jingle bell, and I said, watch out, bear. Watch out, bear, I got a jingle bell. And I got to town. I couldn't resist bragging about the bear. It turned out he's this 400-pound bear that has been seen up and down this trail, and I just felt so thrilled. And you do tend to see bears when you're out biking. I've seen a couple of them. It's kind of cool. Well, finally I got to Green Bay, crossed at Manitowoc on the ferry, and I made it home, 20 pounds lighter, and in need of some suntan lotion. And so that was 2,711 miles across country. I averaged 77 miles a day. Took me, I think, 33 days, and I spent 3 days in motels, but the rest of the time I camped the whole way. And yeah, it was fun. Now, that said, and I didn't include these other slides because we're going to see some northern Michigan slides. There are so many opportunities to go bike touring in America now where you don't have to go on roads that are dangerous. Right after this, my wife and I did 250 miles on the Katy Trail up the Missouri River from St. Louis, and I highly recommend that. There's all these bike amenities all the way along that trail, like restaurants and bike shops, and in Jefferson City, they have a big fancy hotel that's got a biker's deal. We've also biked from Pittsburgh to Washington, D.C. on the Allegheny Trail and the C&O Canal Trail. And the first half of that's got a lot of B&B type things. And the second half, from Cumberland, Maryland to Washington's got a campground every 5 miles. And done a number of other trails, the Grand Canyon of Pennsylvania. There's just trails all over now, so you don't really have to go road biking if you don't want to. And personally, I'm more inclined to go on just those trails from now on. We're going to talk about northern Michigan biking now. And when I say northern Michigan, I'm referring to the northern lower peninsula. I live in Traverse City, and this is kind of the area that I cover for bike riding, from Manistee up to the Straits and then down to Alpena and back around. Like I said, I've got about 40 routes and 1,400 miles. Michigan now is the #1 trail state in America. We've got the most rail trails and the most rail trail miles. And then we've got this insane number of snowmobile trails that you don't really want to go biking on because there's a lot of yahoos on their ATVs out there. But, you know, for biking, we don't suffer here. So be proud of yourself, because they're building this new Iron Bell Trail from Belle Isle all the way to Ironwood, and that'll really cap it for us. Why go to northern Michigan bicycling? Well, we got some beautiful scenery up there. We got Sleeping Bear Dunes. Got, you know, some fun towns. Got a lot of beach towns. You know, Traverse City is really fun. Petoskey. We got the wine country up there. I don't know if they got, 50 wineries or something now. And the region is on every top 10 list in the country. And every time I read another top 10 thing, I think, shut up about that. We don't need any more people up here. But mostly we got this wonderful bicycle culture. Because a lot of people, this is the Tweed ride in the spring where everyone dresses up like they're in London. And we've got bike trails everywhere. This is the Cherry Roubaix Grand Fondo bike race in August. We just got a lot of biking amenities. And why drive to northern Michigan when you can ride a bike there? Like you can ride from Grand Rapids to Cadillac, and then I've pioneered a route on the right from Cadillac to Traverse City. That's the tricky part. So this is the White Pine Trail that starts out from Grand Rapids, goes through Rockford, up along 131. That's what I rode, just a little hybrid bike with a hammock to sleep in. There aren't many campgrounds, so I just pulled off and camped wherever I wanted, near the garbage dump, I think. Because there's some Amish on the way, and you'll see some of these horse and buggies going up and down the bike trail. Out there in the midway through, it's kind of funny to see a horse and buggy on the bike path. Once you're up north, I'm just going to tell you a few of my favorite routes. The Betsy Valley Trail. Has anyone done this? Yeah, this is great. This is from, it goes from Thompsonville kind of through the Benzie jungle to Beulah. But the fun part is really from Beulah to Frankfort. And let me get my video started here. Goes along Crystal Lake, kind of just on some hard-packed limestone for starters. Usually I have my own gear and things go a little smoother here, so bear with me. And then you ride through the forest along the Betsy River. And then once you're in Frankfort, there's got some wonderful restaurants there. It's got a big pier there, huge bicycle culture there. I strongly recommend that trail. Another thing, if you like to road bike, one of the safest road bike routes I've seen so far is along M22 from Frankfort to Glen Arbor, because this goes through the Sleeping Bear National Lakeshore, and it's got a nice wide 4-foot side lane. So people tend to be going slower through the park. And once you're in the park, you can jump on the Sleeping Bear Heritage Trail, which when complete will be 28 miles through the park. I think they got about 21 miles of it done right now. And has anyone done this? I imagine there's some people. Yeah, it's really cool, isn't it? And you can, if you don't have your own bike, you can rent bikes in Glen Arbor at the cyclery. Oh boy, here we go again. Hey, there's one big porta potty out there. Just go behind a tree. You're in northern Michigan. We had a hell of a windstorm there a few years ago and knocked down thousands of trees. One of my favorite road bikes routes, once you're up in that area, is around Big Glen and Little Glen Lakes. Again, this is a relatively safe ride. It's 19 miles around these lakes. You can get a ride part way on the trail through the park, and then you can have lunch in Glen Arbor. Very nice day trip. The classic trip out of Traverse City is the Leelanau Trail, and again, I imagine some of you have done this one. This goes from Traverse City up to Sutton's Bay, and thousands of people ride this trail every day. Yeah. And I'm communications director for the Cherry Capital Cycle Club up there, so we have a ride we do every Friday. If you're ever up there on Friday, we leave at the base of, we leave from Traverse City at 9 in the morning, go up and have coffee and donuts up there. The Little Traverse Wheelway from Charlevoix goes all the way to Harbor Springs, all the way along Little Traverse Bay and Lake Michigan, and that's another can't miss kind of trail. Have to apologize, usually I have my own equipment, but it doesn't interface with their system, so that's why we're a little clunky here today. And you enter Petoskey on this trail, and that's a great town for restaurants and such. This actually had the first bike trail, I believe, in America, because way back in the resort times of the 1890s, they had the newfangled bicycle, and a lot of the resorters came up there, and they put in about the first mile of bicycle route in the country. It's called the Little Traverse Wheelway. Well, if you want to get really crazy, though, one thing you might want to try is Beaver Island, and that's 30 miles out of Charlevoix on the boat. Costs about $60 to ride out there, and it's really fun. This is the Beaver Island Bike Festival, and it's really nice because you get the chance to ride through Lake Michigan. Now, right about there, I saw my wife go sideways with her brand new iPhone in her pocket, and splash, but miraculously, she got wet, but the iPhone didn't, so. Cool beans. Another great route is the Tunnel of Trees. Has anyone here done the Zootomac? Okay, we got some real veterans in here. I rode this twice up and back this spring, and I've ridden the Zootomac a number of times. This goes all along the coast. It's pretty hilly from Harbor Springs up to Mackinaw City. Really fun. And here's some of those trilliums. Millions of trilliums out there in May. A ghost in the machine, I think. And they all start out from Boyne Highlands. 4,000, 5,000 cyclists. Most of them are from this area, too. If you like the long distance trails, definitely can recommend the Gaylord to Mackinaw City Trail. This is best done on a mountain bike or a hybrid bike, and it goes through the Pigeon River State Forest, where once Ernest Hemingway camped as a young man, and the Michigan militia held forth there in Wolverine, and a lot of history along that trail. Another fun trail, if you're looking for a long-distance adventure, this is 72 miles from Alpena to Sheboygan, and it's all through the old lumbering country. So there's a lot of history along this route. Great forest fires they had years ago. This is my wife. We did this in one day, and they're really up to date on their welcome sign there in Onaway. It's Jeanette doing her thing. Yay. Well, she looked pretty fresh there, but I was about ready to drop over dead myself by that time, and I really needed a big beer. Well, if you're really adventuresome, I have a route that's about 470 miles I call the Great Northern Loop. It's a figure eight, and it takes in the very best of northern Michigan, Frankfort, the dunes, Mackinaw Bridge, tunnel of trees, great camping along the way, can't beat it. And, that's pretty much what my story is. I just welcome you to come up to northern Michigan. I've got, like I say, many more routes in the book, and happy to entertain any questions here if you want to know any more about biking in northern Michigan. Thank you. Yes.
If you don't want to camp, you just want to go, say, in a central place where you can try some really nice trails, like, say, for a week.
Sure. Well, anywhere in Traverse City you can ride out of, or Petoskey you can ride out of, or Frankfort is a nice area. There's all of those towns have got bike routes, bike paths all around them, and every county I've got like a number of detailed routes in that area. So, yeah. And you had a question?
Yeah, when you did your trip from Seattle all the way back, what time of the year was it? Why did you determine to take that particular bike as opposed to the lighter weight bike? And how well did that bike hold up? Why did you get one with a motor?
Well, the reason you ride that particular bike is it's specially designed for touring. The spokes are beefier, and then there's brackets are a little lower center of gravity, so it's not so tippy. So because I've ridden older bikes that weren't designed for touring, and you suffer breakdowns then. Things fall apart if you have a bike that's not specially built for it. And then I went out to this bicycle convention in Missoula, so I had to leave in late June. So I left maybe June 28th or something, and that's why I picked that time of year. Good time to go. Yes?
Have you ever had any bike accidents or got a hill along the way?
Oh, yeah, I've crashed a number of times. The great bicycle racer John Howard said there's only two types of bicyclists, those who have crashed and those who are going to crash. And, the funny thing about crashing is most of the people I've known that crashed were when they're almost at a stop or just standing still because you're not paying attention, you lose your balance, and boom, you fall over. Or I would get a new bike and I'd squeeze the front handlebar and go cartwheeling right over the top. So, that's why you always wear a bicycle helmet, and it pays to stay in shape too, so you bounce. I didn't go through any brake pads, but I did get 5 flat tires, and of course, always on the back tire. And the last one was like really in a nasty old cornfield with nowhere really to camp. And finally, I found a little clearing, and there's all kinds of mosquitoes out, and it was not my happy day. Because at that point, I was trying to do 100-mile days, and I was just shy of that, so I was mad about that. Yes, sir?
How do you power your electronics?
Well, I always carry chargers, and then you're stopping at, maybe you go to a cafe for breakfast or something, so I plug in my chargers, and then I carry a backup power pack because, like you can charge up your headlight, but sometimes I was stuck out there in the dark for a long time, so I plug in that power pack to keep the headlight going. Mm-hmm. And someone else had a question? Yes?
Did you ever get into any trouble because you were just camping wherever?
No, I call that bandit camping. And I've bandit camped all over the world in like Ireland and England and the Danube River. And then a lot of times when you're bicycling out west, you can camp in these town squares. They don't care. You pull into a small town and other bicyclists are camping there. It's no problem. But sometimes you're way out in the middle of nowhere. There's nowhere to camp. So I would just pull off the road and camp wherever. And I've never had any problems at all. But I don't really recommend you do that. It's just that that's what I've done. I've camped under bushes in Ireland and in parks in England, and people look at you funny, but if you just act like it's the most natural thing in the world, well, they think it is too. Someone else had a question over here? Yes?
The trails you were highlighting this evening, are most of those rail trails or a lot of these?
They're a mix. In my book, I have I've got, of course, every rail trail possible, but I also include some things like Mission Peninsula in Traverse City. Everyone wants to ride that, and I don't think it's particularly safe anymore, but I'll tell you maybe what time of day would be good to go on it and what day of the week might be good to go on it where there's less traffic. So I've got a mix of mountain bike trails, limestone crush trail, paved trails, and then road rides that I think are safe. So that's important to me. So, well, I'm going to be up here signing books if anyone wants a book. And usually my presentations go a little smoother. Like I say, I get to use my own equipment, but we made it work. So I thank you for coming, and maybe we'll see you out biking next summer. Okay. Thanks.